It's been said that in the spring of 1519, that as Hernan Cortez led his armada from Spain and settled on the eastern coast of what is today South America, he promptly ordered that the ships be disembarked, that the camp be set up, and then that the ships be burned. The story more broadly tells that the soldiers who arrived in the New World found that it was going to be a little more difficult than they had initially been told. They'd been told that the land was abandoned, that it was empty, that there was nothing simply but for them to go and discover all of the riches that God had already intended for them to have. Turns out there were people there after all, and that the work ahead of them was hard. And so as the grumbling started and as the rumors of mutiny began to creep into the camp, Cortez made a bold decision. No longer would it be possible for people to think about abandoning the mission in front of them. No longer would it be possible for people to look at those nice, comfortable ships and imagine how easy it would be to just go back to the land that we had once upon a time. After all, there was genocide to carry. So Cortez famously ordered the ships. There is no retreat from the mission in front of us. Now, the story may be powerful. It's probably more likely that he had the ships disassembled and turned into manageable supplies for the encampment. But the result is the same. Within 2 years, Cortez had conquered and decimated the Aztec Empire. And the trade of riches back and forth between Spain and South America would proceed unabated for centuries. Burning the ships is a bold choice. That's a choice in a lot of ways that Jesus invites us to consider in this passage. As Jesus calls the disciples to him for the first time, he is calling them into something that they're not quite sure what they're getting into. As he calls them, he's not calling them simply to follow him, but to enter into a life of apostleship, a life of sin, a life of going into all the places where Jesus himself is about to go. To be a disciple in the first century was to adopt the practices and the habits of your teacher, to take onto yourself their yoke, their instrument of burden. When a teacher took a new disciple, he would often take the shawl that he wore and would wrap it gently and intentionally around the shoulders of his new disciple as a sign that together we have been yoked in this direction. Together we have been bound for the work ahead of us. And together we will go, but we will go always together. Part of the reason that with Jesus' great words of comfort, take my yoke upon you, for my burden is easy, and my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Jesus calls the disciples to him and metaphorically wraps his own calling around their shoulders and says, okay, Matthew, okay, Philip, okay, Bartholomew, Peter, Andrew, James, etc., okay, Judas. Now it's time for us to go together. Now it's time for you to enter into this work it's time for us to enter into the story that says that you are not simply here to follow me, but to go alongside of me. To go out, as I am about to go out. The choice that Jesus calls the disciples to make is the choice of frontier over fortress. Because human nature is prone to settle for a destination with discipleship is a calling to go. Human nature loves to settle. It loves, and It's been said that there is in some people a genetic predisposition to going. What drove explorers to first sail ships beyond the horizon? What drives people to one day want to colonize red, dead rock thousands of miles away from our planet is a desire to move beyond the place of settling into a place of promise. To believe that the future is as yet unfound and unexplored, and that by going, we can find and participate in what God is already up to and what God is already doing. To be an explorer to be an apostle is to be an explorer. To be one who is sent is to believe that there is more yet to discover in our neighborhoods and in our communities around us. Discipleship can't be the destination. Because when we make discipleship the destination, we settle in this moment right here and settle for only reaching the people that we have already reached. When discipleship becomes the destination, we begin to believe that there is an inside and an outside. That if you have accepted the things the way they are, if you have been blessed by the church in its current form, that's been the goal. And instead, the call of discipleship is a call to continue. Instead, seeing the call of discipleship as a call to continually go and reach further still and go further yet, is to recognize that there are people on the outside who matter. That there are people who are yet on the fringes and on the margins of faith and life, who need to be not brought in, but brought to, but brought with Jesus. That's why Jesus is clear, both in this passage and in the same story in Luke, that the reason he's sending them out is because Jesus is about to go to these places. The disciples are not simply going as on their own strength or in their own power, in their own way to go and do things in a very human-centered way. They're going because they're going to meet Jesus in the places where Jesus is already active, where Jesus is already serving, where Jesus is already ministering. The call to go is not a call to go and fix things. It's a call to go and meet Jesus in the places where Jesus is already active and vibrantly ministering in the ways that we never expect him to. Because that is what Jesus does. Jesus calls unlikely men and women and children together into a mission of going, and it does not matter how educated you are. Jesus calls Peter and his brother Andrew fishermen. It doesn't matter how despised you are. He calls Matthew, names him the tax collector. It doesn't matter what you will do in the future, good, bad, or otherwise. He calls Judas, who will betray him. The calling is simply to go. To go and believe that by going you are being obedient to the call on your life, that by going and finding out where Jesus is already about to go, you are participating with him in a bigger work than you can ever imagine. The choice of frontier over fortress is a choice to believe that the people outside of the wall, the people who are not attending church on Sundays, the 80% of Canadians who will never attend church this week except for a wedding or a funeral, matter. And in some cases, if we can be so bold, we might even say they matter more than the people who are here today. Because those are the people that Jesus calls us to reach. He calls us to move beyond our comfort zone, to move outside of a discipleship that simply creates destination and goes. And he gives the church advice for going. He says the church that goes needs to abandon its comfort. And so the question that we need to ask is where do we find our comfort zone? Where do we find our source of comfort and strength? Because most of the time through human history, as you read it, the more comfortable people get with something, the more the disruption is needed. In the 1920s, in the early 1920s, it was famously said by a politician that the good times will never stop rolling. But the reality of the 1920s was that the Rockefellers and the big names of the era were deeply comfortable, and life was very good for them. But for the vast majority of people, living across the planet at that time, for the other billion and 1.9 billion people alive in the world at the time, life was very much not good. And so when the stock market crashed on Black Friday, everyone began to reimagine and reassess the nature of human equality. By understanding how comfortable people had become with inequality, it primed the world to open itself up to a new way of imagining the social contract. Theologians like Walter Rauschenbusch in New York City began to imagine that there was a social imperative to the gospel, that we had an obligation not just to evangelize minds and hearts, but to actually perform what he called corporeal acts of mercy. We take for granted that charity and social justice are baked into the life of the church, but it's a phenomenon that's barely 100 years old. It happened because people recognized that when we got comfortable, we got complacent. And when we got complacent, we stopped paying attention to the mission that we were actually called to. Complacency is the great enemy of the church. And so Jesus asks the disciples, when they go out, are you comfortable where you're going? Are you comfortable? Go nowhere among the Gentiles or the Samaritans, these people who Jesus has been ministering to up to this point, the people who have, for the most part, been deeply receptive to the mission of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus. He says, don't go to them. Go to the people who have it all figured out, who have a systematic theology for every single part and area of life, and have taken the 10 Commandments, that Decalogue, the initial law that Moses gave, and have expanded it to be over 700 distinct commands. Have taken the simple rules for life in the power and the presence of God and have expanded and unfolded it and unpacked it in a deeply systematic and deeply perfected way, such that when you go in and try to minister to them, you rub up against every single part of it. By sending the disciples out to the people that were going to be the least responsive to this message, Jesus is directly and deliberately challenging them to ask, is your message, is the calling that is on your life a calling to be comfortable? Or is it a calling that's going to rub up against the defined parameters of belief? Secondly, he says, are you settling? He says, acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, no tunic, no sandals or staff, for a laborer deserves his food. But notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, go and make yourselves miserable for the sake of the gospel, but he simply says, go and earn nothing in doing it. Go and simply get by. For those of you who have parents or grandparents who were first-generation immigrants to this country, this story might sound more familiar. For those of you who have gone through the immigration process yourself, you recognize and you understand that so often life feels like a process of barely getting by one day after another. The more I talk to people who have come to this country from somewhere else, the more I've begun to empathize with the challenge of settling rather than simply continuing to go. And I try to imagine that for Christians in the first century who the entire world was frontier, the challenge for them became, how do we continue to go and go and go? And the only way that you can continue to go and go and go and never actually and take everything that you get for your moment and reinvest it into your mission is to build a community that believes in this mission together. There is no singular calling. There is no single person that Jesus calls and says, okay, now you go and you do all the work. And Jesus could have done that. That was all too common in the Hebrew Bible. You get those stories all the time. In other faith traditions, you get the singular hero who goes and has the message. That is the fundamental tenet of Islam, is that Muhammad is the prophet of God, praise be upon him. And so what Jesus does is unique. By creating a community of mission, he reminds us that everything that we do together has to be reinvested and reimagined in light of the mission that we're serving. In light of what we're called to, how do we recontextualize our gifts and our capacities? How do we reimagine and repurpose what we have for mission together? Because we all have different things. We all have different skill sets and different capacities. We all have different levels of financial stability and different levels of energy. We all have different things that we bring to this table, and it's only when we bring what we can that the mission is furthered. Are you settling is a question of recognizing, are you building something here that's for the people here, or are you building something around you that's for the people around you? Jesus' call is a call to mission, and it's a call to sending that recognizes that first and foremost, we are called to reach the people who need to be reached. And too often in church, we've bought into a lie that says, if you build it, they will come. We buy into a field of dreams theology. And we've tried that in the 80s and the 90s and the aughts and the 10s. And 3 generations have come and gone and been found wanting. And we keep saying, if we build it, they will come. If we build it, they will come. If we build it, they will come. And they are not coming. And so we have to so this calls us into a gut check. If that is what we believe, if we believe that we have something that needs to be shared, then, and build it and they will come has not worked. We have to go and share it ourselves. This is a challenge for the disciples of Jesus to move away from a come and see kind of idea that was so prevalent even in the first couple chapters of Matthew, to a go and be kind of discipleship. Go and be the people of God in your neighborhood. Go and be the people of God in your workplaces. Go and be the people of God in your families. This is what contemporary evangelism looks like. It means recognizing that there is a story that needs to be shared and that story lives in your heart. And the reality is that you are equipped to tell this story in 1,000 different ways before supper today. You are equipped not because you have a perfected theology, not because you have the answers to the questions, but because you have a heart for the people that you love. That is the sole requirement in an apostolic discipleship. Do you have a heart for the people that you love? If so, will you pour yourself out for them? Will you give yourself to them completely and say, I will give more to you than I take from you. I will do more for you than I require of you. I will love you and I will give myself to you, whether it is humiliating, degrading, or exhausting for me, because that is what love requires. That is what apostolic discipleship requires. That is what frontier requires. When C.S. Lewis was writing the Chronicles of Narnia, somebody asked him, "Why are you writing children's fiction?" And he said, "Fiction does something incredible. Fiction lets fiction lets the guard of reason have some time off." And so he weaved a beautiful story that continues to inspire and affect kids today. He told a story of 4 children who journeyed through a wardrobe in Second World War England and find themselves in a mystical land where that feels strangely familiar to a Christian audience. And at the center of it is the sacrifice of Aslan, the king, the lion. When the girls first hear, the 2 sisters first hear that Aslan is on his way, they're a little nervous, and so they talk to their hosts at the time and say, "So, I don't think I've ever met a lion before. Is it safe? Is he a tame lion?" And the beavers start to laugh. "Safe? Goodness, no, child," they said. "He's a lion. There's no safe lion. But what he is good. Behold," says Jesus, "I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be wise as serpents, and innocent as doves." The call of discipleship is not a call to safety and security and for everything to be fine all the time. Nothing in the Christian gospel should give us that impression, because every single one of the 4 gospels that we have ends with the hero of the story hanging on a cross, beaten and bloodied. Safety is never in the cards for us. Security should not be our goal. And the moment we think that we have found something that makes us feel good in the gospel, we might have started to build fortresses rather than frontiers. But sheep get to be shrewd. Sheep get to be clever. Sheep get to find new and creative ways to navigate the changing world. And our job, our passion should be, how do we find more ways to reach the world today? I mean, this was a church that was at the forefront of live streaming. Now every church is live streaming because it's literally what you have to do. But what was the last thing we innovated at? What was the last time that we thought to ourselves, how are we going to reach more people with this message? How are we going to get more people to hear about this? Because this is I'm scared. Because if we are believing that Jesus has sent us out, if we take seriously that he tells us that our job is not to expect safety and security, but is to simply go into a place that is unfamiliar, if we go unprepared to reach new people and try the same thing, we will fail. We will lose. And we will do so to the glory of God. But if we believe that we've been sent out as sheep who are shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves, Jesus will meet us in our neighborhood. Jesus will meet us in our workplaces. Jesus will meet us front and center in the restaurants and at the bars and in the coffee shops and in the concert venues, in the community halls, in the centers, in the parks, in the parking lots. Jesus will meet us when we're shrewd. When we choose frontier over fortress, we are choosing to live life boldly and riskingly for the sake of Jesus. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit,
For as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.